Molti di voi conosceranno già Daniele, lo presento in italiano perché Daniele vive in Inghilterra da tantissimi anni ed è la prima volta in 15 anni che torna in Italia. Quindi voglio davvero un grande applauso per Daniele che presenterà oggi il primo keynote della giornata. Many of you, so please. Daniele is a long time friend of mine and of many people here. He's a long time Django CMS and Django contributor and has been recently appointed as a Django core developer. So he will talk about us, our body. And so it's up to you, Daniele, and your programmer's body.
Mi sentite? Oh. No? Sì? Ok. Buongiorno, parlo in inglese, con titoli anche in italiano. So thank you very much for inviting me to the Django Village. I'll be talking about the programmer's body. So let me tell you a little bit about me first. That's me, in case you don't recognize me. I work at Cardiff University School of Medicine as a web developer using Django. I am a core developer of Django and of Django CMS that some of you will know. I organized Django Weekend Cardiff earlier this year, and I was part of the organizing team of DjangoCon Europe in France, and I will be involved in organizing DjangoCon Europe 2015 in Cardiff next year, so maybe see you there. And very soon I will actually start in a new job in July with Divio, one of the sponsors of this event, so that's very exciting for me personally. Okay, let's start with a talk. So I have been thinking about questions of diversity in our industry, but particularly in our Django community. And it's a question that comes up again and again, and there are many problems associated with this idea of diversity and who the people are in the community and what that means. So mostly, I assume that most people agree that diversity is valuable and important and worth trying to achieve if we can. But I'll start with, well, let me start with two questions which are related and are connected to each other and to the general theme. So firstly, maybe you know the answer to these questions. Actually, if you were in DjangoCon Europe last month, then you might have an idea already. Who were the earliest, or rather, what were the earliest computers? And it might seem irrelevant, but it's the most important question. What animal would you be if you could be an animal? So on the first question, what were the earliest computers? Does anybody know what the earliest computers were? Well, here's a picture of them. These were the earliest computers. This is what the word computer meant until fairly recently in human history. And these particular computers were working at the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics in the United States. And computers were people who performed complex calculations in engineering, in astronomy, aeronautics, and so on. One very important fact about them is that they all tended to be women. Would anybody like to hazard a guess at why women were so suited to this role? Have a guess. It's true, they had to be precise, and in fact they were precise, but the real reason is that they could be paid half of what a man doing the same work would be paid. So that made them specially suitable for the role. Computer power, when electronic computers started to come along, used to be measured in the amount of power it would take to solve a computer problem was measured in girl years or girl hours. How many girl years does this computer take to solve this problem? So there's an interesting relationship already between people, or certain women rather, and computing power. In this talk, I want to talk about a book, Microservi, by Douglas Copeland. It's pretty well known to English readers, but it has been translated into Italian, but it's out of print and apparently quite rare. So I don't know if anybody here has read Microserfs either in English or Italian. And it's a book about written about 20 years ago about a young group of programmers coming out of Microsoft and starting their own startup. And it's a very forward-looking book. So although it's 20 years old and in a sector where things move very fast, it doesn't seem out of date in its important things. So for example, what these programmers are building in their startup is something that looks more or less exactly like Minecraft. A game an open-ended game of construction where you do things with objects and interact with a digital universe. And the people in this book are young people who are so completely products of the computer age that their only way of understanding the rest of the world is through the concepts and language of computer technology. So politics, history, economics, even medicine. These things they can only understand and talk about with each other or to themselves through the concepts of information technology, of informatics. So, programmers are building our world in the same way that engineers and empire builders built the world in the past. Sorry, I seem to have lost a slide. Okay, sorry. Code is the architecture of the 90s. This is one of the characters says in Microserfs. And in fact, programmers are building the world. They're not just the architects, they're building every aspect of it, from its grand design to the tiny details of the implementation. So software now structures the world that we are living in, and it's programmers who are doing that structuring, and they are responsible for the systems that govern our lives and relationships. They determine the ways in which we are able to have relationships. Think of Facebook, for example, the way we are able to have conversations. Think of Twitter. They are determining the way that we are educated and informed, the way we interact with the rest of society, with politics, and so on. So programmers, which is us, have a lot of responsibility on our hands. So a couple of questions occur. Firstly, who are these programmers who are doing this such important work on behalf of the whole of humanity? And what do they believe? You know, what ideas do they have that are determining what they do? So let's go to the first question. Who are these programmers? And it's reasonable to ask, does it actually matter? So a good liberal would say, well, what matters is not who we are, what matters is what we do. Yeah, because it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, black or white, young or old. That's not the important thing. What matters is what you do. So John Stuart Mill, one of the famous English liberals. There are plenty of others, mostly in the Anglophone tradition, but there are others, as well as John Stuart Mill. We have people like Thomas Paine, Adam Smith, Thomas Jefferson, a number of French thinkers. And liberalism has some important principles or some concepts that characterize it, that it abstracts from particulars, that what matters are not what's special to me or special to you. It makes assumptions and assertions of equality, so it assumes that we have the same capacities and says that we should have also the same rights, for example. It repudiates tribalism or special interests of particular groups, and it asserts the individual's autonomy, responsibility, and merit. So these are values that are held by many people. They are values that are built into our political systems and our systems of rights and our ways of thinking. And if you don't like these values, then you have to be either quite lucky, you have to be quite confident that you are in one of the special groups that's privileged, or hope that you're going to be lucky. Yeah? Because this is one of the things that guarantees that the people who are not so lucky have certain protections. Okay? So this is the important ideas. And there are metaphysical antecedents to this that go a long way back to the ancient Greeks. So we can find in Descartes and Galileo, for example, certain metaphysical principles that align with these. It's not just a political ideology. So we have a clear distinction between mind and body, in which mind is the important thing, which is alive, essential to us, it's free, it's what makes us human, and the body is matter, inert, it's determined, mechanical, it's merely animal. And this is a metaphysics which itself helped give birth to science, because having a mechanical, determined nature makes it possible to apply mathematics to it. So we have a picture of a universal humanity coming out of liberalism, in which we abstract from the differences. The differences are not what count, and what's important about humanity is shared. And through this we get concepts such as universal human rights. So it's a very powerful ideology which stretches a long way, as I said, in not just into political ideology, but into things like science and our whole way of thinking about the world. So let's go back to that question. Who are these programmers, if they're building the world? And the good liberal answer is, a good liberal answer is that it does not matter. And what's more, that asking who they are is a wrong question, because it's not important, takes us down the dangerous paths about who are you, or to say this. It's not important. What matters is what people do and what people think. So what do programmers believe? Well, the ideology of our industry is very closely aligned with the liberal ideology. It shares liberalism's privileging of the mind over the body. We've got certain ideas going on now of disembodiment, the virtual, and this extends to the world around us, the relationships between us. So even your books, your photographs, and your music are no longer as tangible and physical as they used to be. Your computer systems might be virtualized. Your relationships are online. We are moving away from the body to a sphere, if you like, of the mind, just as that liberal ideology imagines us to be, beings of the mind rather than of the body. So our industry is involved in a redefinition, an ongoing redefinition of humanity, where we have these online personalities and relationships, disembodied minds, and sexless, classless, raceless selves. So we can be defined now, not by who we are or where we came from, but by what we're doing. And there's something liberalizing and attractive about this. This is a very famous cartoon from the New Yorker magazine from, I think, 1993 on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dog. Somebody who would be excluded in the real world because of who they, in the real world, sorry, in the embodied world because of who they are. In this new world, this new disembodied world, they can be the equal of everyone because nobody knows who you are or where you came from. There's another example of this in microserfs, where one of the characters begins a relationship online with someone and corresponds for a year or more without knowing who this person is, how old they are, what sex they are, or where they're from. He says, I'm in love, and I don't know who he or she is, how old or anything. And this is probably not such a weird idea now as it was 20 years ago to the general public, but this idea of disembodied relationships, where the important part of the relationship is not to do with a body, but to do with an exchange of those things that are of the mind are the most important. There was a film made recently. I don't actually know what it was called in Italian. In English, it was called Her, where Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with the Siri on his mobile. It's not Siri, but it's something like Siri on his mobile phone, and has a very important emotional relationship. So these ideas are out there, and disembodiment is becoming an important activity in our world. So here's another programmer who's building our world. So his vision of how relationships are and how they work has redefined them for millions of people through Facebook. It's an excellent example of the programmer who is defining and reconstructing the world. And they have some incredible technologies at their fingertips. So most recently, Facebook acquired Oculus. And he said, we're going to make Oculus a platform for many other experiences. Imagine enjoying a courtside seat at a game, studying in a classroom of students and teachers all over the world, or consulting with a doctor face-to-face just by putting on goggles in your home. Now, actually, my reaction to this is that this is credulous bullshit. Okay? He's inviting us to enjoy these things. Now, I'm reasonably imaginative, but I can't imagine enjoying or wanting to do any of that. I can't imagine this improving education for anyone. And it makes me think, has the person who said that ever needed to see a doctor in his life? He's young and healthy. Maybe he has never been to the doctor. So I want to go back to an earlier question. Really, who are these programmers who have such ideas? Well, I can tell you that they, or we, are typically educated, privileged, affluent, Western young men, and nearly all white as well. And the more influential these programmers are, the more educated, affluent, and Western and white they tend to be. So these are the people who are setting the agenda, not just for the industry, but for also for the rest of the world, because they are responsible for building the world as it's being built. So I don't want you to think that I've got anything against white men. You know. So does it matter who these people are? Well, what about cases when other groups have been exclusively of one kind or another of white men? You know, politicians and lawmakers, judges, doctors, scientists, programmers. Has it been safe for people who are not privileged, educated, healthy, white men when only those people, or mostly only those people, get to be things like judges and lawmakers, or the police? Okay. So I think that history tells us that when that's the case, there are some concerns that we should be aware of. And I think it applies to programmers too. So let's go back once again to the body. And we were asking, does it matter about the body? Well, let's go back, let's have a look at Douglas Copeland. Again, this is another conversation from the book. We pretend bodies don't exist. Brains are what matter. Bodies are downplayed to near invisibility, genericized into those international symbols you see at airports, you know, little figures. So there's a real resistance to the incorporation of the body into the world of the programmer. But which bodies are we talking about? Which bodies is liberalism or this ideology of the industry trying to abstract from? Which bodies did it start with when it declared them to be secondary to the mind and possibly even surplus to requirements? Well, they are the bodies of those who don't need to think about their bodies. Largely because the world was created with people who had bodies like that. Unencumbered, adult, healthy bodies, fully functioning bodies, male bodies that don't do inconvenient things like become pregnant or need to be looked after or need to look after others. So it's very easy to set aside the body and declare it to be secondary to the mind if you don't need to worry about your body. Whereas if your body is malfunctioning or in pain or dependent upon others, it's much more difficult. Here are these generic icons, these generic signs that you see at airports. This is from an airport in Marseille. These, on one side, we have the bodies of those who don't need to think about bodies, and the bodies of the people who do need to be concerned about bodies, the normal and the abnormal, the ones who have no needs and the ones who have special needs. Why do the ones have no needs on the left? Because the world was built for their kind of bodies. So, in fact, we get to a kind of blind spot in liberalism. Because liberalism wants to abstract from the body, it finds it very hard to understand the body. Its concept of freedom in the concept of freedom in liberalism is the concept of freedom from constraint, for people who are already in a good position to exercise that freedom, not the people who are already burdened by others. And worse, we have to deal with the blind spots, not just of the ideology, but of privileged elites, like young programmers who go to Harvard and have fantastic educations and plenty of money. So we now have privileged elites responsible for building the world on behalf of everyone. And these people belong to a narrow culture of privileged classes, and they hold to a politics that disvalues the body, ignores the body, shrugs off bodily difference, and says it doesn't really matter. And this is partly why I think it does matter who the programmers are, and why the liberal position is inadequate, and why it lacks a way even to understand the issue. And there's another problem with this ideology of the industry. It's actually a big self-delusion in a way, because the industry, our industry, is full of some terrible itches that we can't scratch because we lack the tools to do that. So the reality of our industry is that actually we are obsessed with the body. All of the struggles and controversies of our industry center around the body. Think of any of the large controversies that we've endured in the world of technology over the last year. They have all been in one way or another about the body. So Brendan Eich, of the CEO of Mozilla, who had to resign because of his attitudes to gay marriage. We have things like incidents of harassment in conferences and online, big disputes about language, and so on. So although the industry pretends to be reaching out to this non-corporeal, this disembodied world, it's actually fixated upon the body. And the more it tries to reach to this non-physical, disembodied world, the more it gets tangled up in problems of real bodies. And this is reflected again in Microsoft's, where the whole book is about the body, about people's bodies, the bodies of these programmers in crisis being these lost and neglected bodies that have to be found again and loved again, and malfunctioning bodies that need to find ways to work, bodies that suffer illness and death and birth. And the characters in the story rediscover themselves through a kind of reintegration, reevaluation of the body. And some of it's very funny. The narrator becomes obsessed with the idea that the body is so important that actually memories must be stored in the body. So all these important scenes in this book are body related. In our industry, we look at bodies, we see that there's a tremendous lack of diversity of body, disparities, a huge difference in things like confidence and pay between people with different kind of bodies. We have all these controversies that have erupted around bodies. And then, as I alluded to, the really dark side of things like harassment and so on. So we're dealing with an ideology that I think actually can be characterized as both unsafe and blind. So, who are these programmers? And liberalism wants to answer, well, does it really matter? And I think the answer is yes, it does actually matter. It's not safe for programmers to be only white men, healthy, white, affluent, educated men. And what does this mean for us? Well, the problem for liberalism is that it inadvertently undermines diversity. It undermines its own values. It's not because that's its intention, but that's its effect. It undermines its own key aspirations, things like justice and fairness and equality and so on, because it can't find a proper place for the body in its thinking. And the same applies to our industry. Our own aspirations for diversity and equality require us to understand the significance of the body. And without it, our industry will not succeed in doing what liberalism fails to do. So back to the body. All those things on the left-hand side are the ones that are privileged and valued highly by our ideology and our industry. The ones on the right are the ones that fail to find a proper place. And they are all the things of the body. And I think that until we, programmers, and I mean we, our community of Django, where we're trying to deal with some of these questions, we, our industry, which is struggling with certain things, and we, our society, which is also struggling with those things, until it finds a way to incorporate the things on the right-hand side and give them an equal value with the things on the left-hand side, we're going to be stuck with the same problems caused partly by our own ideology's inability to dig itself out of this hole. So I just want to go back to that one of the very first questions I asked. And I hope you thought about this. So this is a question from microserfs. What animal would you be if you could be an animal? And it's really important, because the answer is that you are already an animal. And the better we understand this, the better we will be placed to scratch those itches, to remedy those itches. We can't find a place for those things on the right-hand side until we truly understand this and build it into our thinking and our activities. Our troubles are troubles of the body, fundamentally, and only through an understanding of the body will we find a way to address them. Thank you very much. So, if you have any questions about that or think that it's completely wrong, then I'm interested to know, because
I just wanted to say thank you for this talk. I think it's very important what you say. I just wanted to add an example from a place where I worked, and I told we were recruiting some programmers at the tourism website in Switzerland, and I was very happy that we found a woman on in the documents, in the CVs, and I saw that she was very competent, and I told my boss, hey, Stefan, I'm very happy that she's a woman. And he said, well, really, that doesn't matter, it doesn't make a difference. It's just important that she's a good programmer, that person is a good programmer. And I think this is wrong, because as long as there is not equality, so a real balance in the industry, we have to favor women taking the place of where currently men are the majority. So it's wrong to say it's just a matter of how good they are. We need to favor women getting the job when they are equally good, or when they have some features that we think we can also improve and bring forward. So in order to achieve the goal that women are there and take this place.
Well, That's really interesting, and I'm really not sure what my answer to that is, because many people, when you mention to them positive discrimination, which I think is what you're suggesting, is that, would you say that's fair? Just a yes or no.
Probably yes.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure what positive discrimination is. Yeah.
Positive discrimination is where you deliberately, explicitly favor a disadvantaged group to bring them in. So, a lot of people struggle with this idea, and you can see why, you know, because if two people, or if one person is slightly better and the other one is then chosen because she's a woman, then, well, how is that going to make the women feel who get the position? Well, I was chosen because I was a woman and not because I was so good. Anyway, I'm not sure what the answer is about that. But who the person is really does make a difference to how they do the job. So it's part of how they do the job. And we can see this in Django itself. So it's better now, but Django has historically been quite difficult to do multilingual things in. And that's because it was built originally for a newspaper in Kansas. If Django had been built for a newspaper in Zurich, then you can be pretty sure that a concept of multilingual models might have been built into its very core right from the start. And that's an example of why why diversity matters. We need this input from people who are not the same as everyone else. So a balanced team, for example, in the case of an employer, might be a good reason for choosing a certain kind of person over another, because we're not just individuals, we work together as teams. So yes, I think that is a good example of this problem.
Thank you, Daniele. It's been... Thank you for your insight and for being here.